Welcome to this PowerPoint presentation on organizational culture. Think of organizational culture as the personality of the organization. What's it like to work there every day? How do people deal with each other? And how is your company different from some of the rival companies who are in the same industry as yours? While you won't go wrong thinking about organizational culture as the personality of the organization, its formal definition is that the culture is the shared beliefs, the shared values, and the shared traditions of the people in the organization. And the personality of the organization depends upon a great many things. To what extent is the organization rewarding of risk taking and innovation? Or how much does it like to play it safe? How much attention to detail is paid in almost everything that gets done in the organization? Are the people who work there more focused on the goal that they're working toward, or are they more focused on the processes that they have to do to get the job done? Some organizations are very process oriented, and every day becomes an obsession with doing things the right way. And sometimes you can lose sight of what the goal you're after is in the first place. To what extent is the organization focused on the people who work there? Or do they just kind of grind them up and spit them out? Is it team oriented? In other words, how does the work get done there? Are you working together with other people in teams, or is it a bunch of individuals out there on their own trying to get things done? It can be very different between different companies. How competitive or aggressive is it? In some companies, everybody at the same level of the organization feels like they're on the same team. There's a feeling of cohesiveness and closeness. In other companies, they eye each other very carefully because they think of them as competitors, somebody that you're going up against to get that next promotion. And the atmosphere is very different in one place versus the other. How much stability is there in the company? Um, is life there pretty much the same year after year? Or are they always trying new things, growing and expanding and acquiring new enterprises? How much turnover is there? Do the same people tend to stay for long periods of time? Or do people tend to work there for a couple of years and then move on to somewhere else? Another thing that's different from organizational culture to organizational culture is the extent to which the organization actually buys into the cultural values that it pretends to hold. There's a difference between espoused cultural values, meaning this is what the organization says is important, and enacted cultural values, which is what the organization really does day in, day out. And sometimes there's quite a gap between the espoused values and the enacted values. To the extent that organizational climate means something different from organizational culture, maybe you could think about organizational climate as the employee's reaction to the culture. What is their morale like? Do they feel good about working there? Are they happy with their jobs or not? If you're in a place where the culture is a good fit for you, then your morale is going to be high. If you're reacting negatively to the culture, on the other hand, your morale is going to be low. So, really, climate is about the employees' perceptions of the work environment. Although many people, including myself, often use the terms organizational culture and organizational climate interchangeably. But there may, in fact, be a difference. Now, most organizations usually have a dominant culture. There's one set of core values that run throughout the organization that everybody sort of endorses. But most big organizations also have multiple subcultures within geographical parts of the territory or within different departments within the organization. The smaller unit sort of establishes its own little subculture. When I was young, I worked for a large bank in Pennsylvania that had a great many offices. And my job was to travel from office to office when people were on vacation or they were shorthanded for one reason or another. And even though these were all branch offices of the very same bank, there was a very different culture within each office. Some of them were very friendly and casual. Some of them were very competitive. In some cases, the bosses were very strict. So even though it was the same organization, when you got out to these different branches, there were clearly different subcultures operating. Now, cultures can be very strong or they can be weak. A strong culture is one where everybody knows what it is. It's intense, it's widely shared, there's a strong sense of identity. If you ask anybody in the organization to describe the organizational culture, they'll tell you the same thing. A weak organizational culture, on the other hand, is one where it's not quite as widely shared or it's not as intense and clear. And if you ask different people to describe the culture, you might get different answers from different people, and you will probably get answers that aren't very confident. People will say things like, well, it's kind of sort of like this, but not really. And so, whether a culture is strong or weak has a lot to say with how much people in the company embrace it. Now, it's not necessarily good or bad to have a strong culture. If you have a strong culture that's racist and sexist and everybody kind of buys into it, that is not a good thing, but it's still a strong culture. So, being strong or weak as a culture is not necessarily good or bad. They're two separate kinds of concerns. There are a variety of different ways in which organizational cultures get sustained and get passed on from one generation to the next. This can be done through the selection process. A lot of companies are very conscious of hiring people who are a good fit. They want somebody who understands the culture, somebody who's going to want to be a part of it and fit right in. Working at Knox College, when we're hiring new faculty members, we're always interested in somebody who has worked at another liberal arts college or maybe went to a liberal arts college because we know they understand the kind of culture that these places have, and right away they know what they're getting into. Cultures can be sustained through top management. Bosses establish all kinds of norms and rules, and they reinforce them through their words and actions. So it's very important for the bosses to model the values of the organizational culture. Because if the boss isn't doing what the culture says they should be doing, why would any of the lower level employees? So it's important, if a culture is going to be sustained, for the top management to be good role models for that culture. And most organizations, especially large ones, make a conscious effort to socialize new employees into the culture. Now, sometimes this is a formal thing. You go through an orientation process and you have all kinds of legends and stories told to you. You learn about the founders of the company and you learn about the history. And there may be rituals and traditions that the company enforces as a way of reminding you that this is what we're all about. At Knox College, we have pump handle, we have flunk day, we have senior week, we have all kinds of traditions and rituals that sort of bring people into the fold, give them a flavor of what the culture is all about. And these can be reinforced through symbols. Most companies have a logo that you can see everywhere. They may even have a company flag. In some companies, people wear clothing that have the logo right on it. So wherever you go, you're reminded of the symbols and the traditions of the company that you work for. When new employees are starting a career in a company, they usually go through three distinct stages of socialization. The first stage is known as the pre-arrival stage. Before the new hire actually starts working there, they have some conception of what the company is like. They have certain beliefs and expectations about what the culture will be like, what day-to-day life will be like, what the rewards are going to be like for working there. And so they've already started mentally identifying with the company and socializing themselves before they even get hired. For example, if we're hiring a new professor at Knox College, maybe a couple of months before the person actually starts teaching there, they go out and get a Knox College sweatshirt and start wearing it around, and they start kind of imagining themselves and what their students are going to be like. And so they're mentally preparing to work at the organization. The encounter stage is what happens in the early period of time after the employee begins work there. In the encounter stage, there's this collision between the expectations that the person had before they started work and the reality of what life is actually like in the organization. And usually these two things do not match up perfectly. The expectations that the person had are not usually accurate, and this can be a positive or negative thing. Maybe the person in some ways dreaded starting the new job because they were afraid they'd be in over their head. They'd heard that it was highly competitive and cutthroat. And then they get in there and find out that the culture is actually quite different and that their coworkers are friendly and supportive, and they're pleased about that. But they have to change the way they think about the organization because their encounter with it has been different. And it can also be quite negative. Perhaps at the time of hire, they were told all kinds of wonderful things about what it's like to work there and what your coworkers will be like and what the rewards of the job will be. And then you get in there and find out that it's an absolute hellhole, in which case you're going to be very disappointed and unhappy. And these are the kinds of things that happen during the encounter stage. Now, assuming that the person doesn't leave during the encounter stage because they're disillusioned, they will move into what's known as the metamorphosis stage. At this point, they come to terms with the new culture and begin to integrate themselves to it. They begin to let go of the unrealistic expectations they had. They begin to become comfortable with the way that things are. And by the end of the metamorphosis stage, the person is a fully functioning member of their new organizational culture.